Hey everybody, thanks for joining us today here at Sunnyside. It's container gardening day. The thriller, the filler, and the spiller. So I had Nicole. She's in the background there running. We have special guests, my partner Holly here. She runs our seasonal department, and she's been doing this as long as me, so that makes us both old, probably.
Yeah,
right?
I'm older.
So we're gonna have some fun today, making some pots. Holly's gonna be back here kind of planning. I'm gonna try to do some planning. I'll try to stay off to the side here. And we have plenty of time for questions afterwards. So hopefully everybody got access to this fine container sheet. As usual, I wrote something up way too long, but certainly if you like some light reading, you can go through the couple pages. It's got some great tips, kind of some things you should think about as you're considering designing your container garden. It's up on our website, as well as the class will be recorded, so you can always go back and watch it here afterwards, okay? So we're going to whip through.
Trevor, before you get started, do one of you have your radios on?
It's my bad.
I have
Culprit. Thanks.
All right. So like I said, the thriller, the spiller, and the filler, we call those the container commandments. And whenever we're kind of looking at a pot, we're always looking for something that thrills us in the middle, some fillers to fill some gaps, and then something to spill and accentuate the edge of the container as well. So Holly here is planning up her first one. I'm going to let her tell you what she's doing here for the first container.
So I'm going to do a shade container. This is a hydrangea. The specific hydrangea is
Fire
I
Island.
don't have my eyes on Sarah.
Fire Island, I can tell.
So I put it in the hydrangea. That's going to be the thriller. And I'm going to put a carex right next to it. That's going to be one of the fillers. It'll work both as a filler and a spiller. And then I'm going to do a heuchera that will work as a filler.
There you go.
I'm doing a slightly monochromatic pot, which I kind of have like to do. This is a Lysomachia. You can't really see it, but this is a really nice variegated spiller that I'm going to put next to it. And that's going to fill out the whole side of the pot with this bright chartreuse variegation and yellow flowers. And it's going to be very, very showy. And then I'm going to put a Torrenia in as a spiller, which is this particular one's going to be a purple against that orange pot. Right. And it's just going to be gorgeous.
I like that one. I might have to grab that. So she'll keep planting. I'm going to talk about a few kind of basics here. We'll continue to plant. So you can stare back there, or you can listen as well. So if we kind of talk, a little bit about containers. Show your style is the number one. Just because I like it or Holly likes it, you may go, "Ooh, that's not my taste at all." I don't like pink much, if I can admit. So I don't do a lot of pinks in mine. I like the orange, the red, the yellow. And I'm a foliage guy, so I do a lot of foliage and then accent with flowers. That's my taste.
I agree with that.
It's my pot at my house, so I can do what I want. You should be able to do what you want at your own place. So show your style. I'm always looking for permanent container elements. You look at the pot Holly's doing, she's going to have the hydrangea there forever or for a number of years until it outgrows the pot. The grass will stay, the heuchera will stay. She's just having to go through and seasonally replace some of the annuals around there. Pansies maybe in the winter, some nice summer color this time of year to last until we get frost. So look at permanent elements as well. Now, if we look at some basics, we'll talk fertilizers first. So when we're doing containers, I'll show you a couple of mine I brought from my place here in a moment. But I'm always setting up the base with some good organic fertilizer. So I'm typically taking something like Ultra Bloom from EB Stone. Is going to maximize my bud, bloom, and flower potential. So I might fill my container halfway with potting soil to start with. I will sprinkle a nice handful of Ultra Bloom in there and a handful of the EB Stone rose and flower food as well. Now that's kind of to start off. That's going to energize my soil, get the plants growing nicely. Then as we go through the season, specifically with things we plant as annuals, we want to keep them lush, shiny foliage, maximum color. We're going to go through and use something like Seagrow. So if I pull out 2 bottles of Seagrow right here. We have all-purpose, triple 16. This is kind of a nice hybrid, you know, maybe something you'd think of as Miracle Grow, although we don't care for Miracle Grow as much. We like the Seagrow here. So this has got synthetic plus organic ingredients. So I kind of get the best of both worlds for a water soluble. I can simply put a couple scoops of this in my watering can, feed my container every couple weeks, maybe once a month at the least amount, but at least every 2, 3, 4 weeks if you can. All purpose will give me growth and bloom. If I don't want as much of the growth on it and I'm looking for flower power, then I do flower and bloom. That's a 4-26-26. Same exact principles. I can mix that in my can, go back and feed every couple of weeks and have a really nice lush container for the entire growing season by doing that. Osmocote would be the last, you know, kind of option. We do have Osmocote here. That's the familiar pink bottle. Now this is something, if I didn't do the organic, maybe I wanted to just stick with synthetic food, we would be sprinkling this in again with our potting soil, and this would be something that would last us for 5 or 6 months. So I would have a longer term feeding with that one application. This is more of a time release. Okay, so there's some good fertilizers. Now for me, if we talk just a couple things about soil, so this is Edna's best potting soil. Okay, so this is our all-purpose organic blend. Top of the line ingredients. I can use this indoors, outdoors, really anywhere for an all-purpose potting mix. So this is one we're using it. That's what Holly's got in her containers. It's what we use here on our property, just for excellent potting soil blend. If you want to step it up a notch, this is called Ultimate Potting Soil, or the same exact ingredients. They call it Recipe 420. I won't get into why they call it that. That's Holly chuckles.
I can get into it.
But that's our premium potting soil. So if you want all the extra goodies in there, from yucca extract to this to that to the rest, you know, that sometimes I will use if I'm growing a tomato in a container, maybe as a vegetable in particular. That'll give me a little extra kick in the potting soil mix.
Perfect for a tomato.
The last one here in the pretty pink bag is an acid type potting mix. So say we're planting a container garden with maybe a conifer, you know, as a centerpiece, or I do in my own yard and on my patio, I've got potted blueberries on my patio in large container. That is the acidic potting mix that I'm going to use in lieu of potting soil. That's got all the same good natural ingredients, but now I have acidity built in. So I'm going to have a much happier plant long term using that as a mixture for a blueberry or a particular acid loving plant. Okay. Now, if we look at, for me, whenever I set a pot down, I want to get it off my hard surface. So we've got deck, we've got patio, we've got concrete, wherever it sits, we really don't want that pot sitting flat on a surface. We want to elevate it a little bit, make sure we have good drainage. We don't want those circle stains on our brand new deck. So if you look at some options here, things like pot risers, these are all recycled old tire rubber squares. They work great, they're cheap. If I set these down in a little grid of 4, put my pot on there, you will hardly even see them. These are the large ones for huge containers. Most of the time we can use the small ones. They hold a lot of weight, so they're just like 99 cents, you know, for a little square. We put those underneath there, they last forever. You hardly will tell they're there, but now I've got it elevated, so I make sure my drainage is good. If you want to get fancy, we have pot feet. You know, she'll chuckle because this is my favorite one.
Butt feet.
This is from our local artist. He calls these the bottoms up pot feet. So you can see that ledge built on there. I get a set of 3 of those, and again, I can set my big glazed container in there, have my container elevated, and make sure I've got maximum drainage. So always consider getting a pot riser, a pot feet, or something just to keep that off a hard surface.
And those will help keep the staining from happening around the pot too.
Yeah. Now, if I pick this heavy one up here, we get a lot of people that ask me, okay, here's a pretty good size, you know, glazed container. Now, if I'm planting a maple in here or something permanent that I want to have for a lot of years and then accentuating it with fillers and some annual color, I want soil all the way to the bottom. I don't want a gap. I don't want a filler. I want soil so my tree or my conifer, whatever it is, lasts the longest term. Let's say I'm planting this as just annuals. I just want flower power, enjoy it for the season. I'll swap it out and see you again next year. You can get something like the upsy daisies. If you look in there, there's a great system of discs that I can form down into my container, set a platform. Now I've cut my soil cost in half. I've got plenty of depth here to grow my annual successfully for the season, but I can save myself a little bit of money on soil, and I've still got all the great drainage with that hollow area at the bottom. I don't like styrofoam myself. There's a lot of other things you'll see around that we could use, perhaps for a filler, but to make it easy, those upsy daisies aren't expensive, and you can find a bunch of different sizes for your own pot to set that depth. I would always look at maybe half, maybe 2/3 soil, 1/3 air if we're just doing annuals. And again, you want to use that as an option, okay? Now, always, when you're considering your container, always look at sun versus shade. We want to have like with like we do everywhere in the yard. So if I have sun, I want heat lovers. If I have shade, I'm going to get some plants that are cool. Holly, again, planted up a shade one. Looks like she's working on a sunny one now.
One going.
So we picked the right plants for the right spot. We've got, again, got a happy container. I'm always looking at watering needs. You know, we're going to have a problem if we plant something that needs very little water with things that need a whole bunch. One is going to thrive, the other one's going to suffer. So make sure we get things that like watering needs planted together. Deadheading, you know, most of the annuals that are come out these days are self-deadheading. We don't have to walk out and pluck sticky petunia flowers off like we had to 10, 12 years ago. There's a lot of annuals that just keep blooming on top of themselves that we don't have a lot of maintenance. Being the OCD guy, yes, I'm out with my little snips and I'm cutting little spent geranium flowers off here and there and some things at my house. But there's a lot of other plants I use, a lot of million bells as an example that I would never have to deadhead. So keep that in mind as you're choosing. You know, when you're looking at a pot, you know, we do a frost proof here, you know, as our mainstay. We've got high-end, beautiful permanent containers that we would never worry about cracking in the winter. We have half-price pots going every day. That sale is not going to end. It's for the whole year. It'll be on next year again. So keep that in mind as you're looking. We got a great selection. We do fibercrete. You know, maybe you want a little lighter weight, something that I bring out in the season, put away for the winter, that maybe I want to cut down the muscle power a little bit and have it a little lighter that I can move it easier. That would be an option as well. We've had a lot of those go out of here the last couple of years because they're very modern looking. You know, maybe you want something a little more modern versus an older rustic or a glazed frost-proof pot. You know, plastics, wood, you know, we can go on and on. Again, it's your pot, it's your style. You know, whatever you would like to do is what you should have for your container, okay? Now, if I gave you a couple of tips, you know, to say you were going to come down today and you're like, man, I'm coming down. I want to get some flowers. I want to get this new pot dialed in. You know, if you have a pot and you're wondering, you know, what do I do with it? Sometimes it's not an easy thing. You know, here's one from my house. I'm not going to walk around, you know, with a 100-pound container and show it to our staff and say, what do I put in here? What do I need? Take a piece of cardboard and trace the top of that pot. Take a piece out of your recycle bin, take a Sharpie and just trace the circle, the square, whatever shape it is. Bring that with you. I think that's a great way for customers to get a map. You know, you lay that down in a cart, we can set plants right on it, draw circles when we're finalized. This goes here, that goes in the middle, this goes spiller, and boom, you've got a little map. We get you a box of plants to send home, and you've got a little blueprint on how you want to design that container when you get home as well. So think of cardboard as a good tip. You know, don't plant your plants too deep. You know, that's one thing I'm talking to customers all these years at nurseries. I think sometimes the annuals get in a little too deep. They put more soil on. We want to keep those in about the same level there in the container. We can run into some issues if we bury up the stems on a lot of plants an inch or two. So be careful on your planter depth. You know, I always mix, like I mentioned earlier, I always mix some organic fertilizer in mine as a starter. I brought 2 of my pots. I'll show you that I've already done that at my house, hauled them up here, got my plants, and I'm ready to go. Then I will go back and supplement with that Seagrow every 2-3 weeks. I do my dahlias, do a bunch of other stuff in the yard to keep them blooming strong. Always loosen up the plant roots a little bit. You probably were watching Holly, you know, where she's looking at a container. You know, let's just say here, I'll borrow one of mine for a minute, a little celosia that's going to go into my sun pot. You know, I'm going to simply pull the tag out, give the base of it a light squeeze. It comes right out of there. that doesn't look super root bound. So I'm not worried about ripping it apart or taking it off. You may get some other annuals that it's a little more root system in there. Don't hesitate. Let's see if I can find one. See, this one's not too bad either. But don't hesitate. If I grab the bottom and simply peel off an inch or two of the bottom, or stick my fingers in and loosen a little bit, I'm not ripping it in half. I'm not going to damage it by doing that. I'm just saying, hey, you've got a new home. Let's go ahead and get you a bigger root system. We've got some fresh soil to grow into. Okay. I always use a little bit of compost on top. You know, if I'm, you know, probably others like to pack their pot where they can't see one speck of square dirt. If we show them that one, there you go. You know, that's
like to pack them.
That's instant container. Holly and I lock a lot of the same things, but I would probably maybe plant 3 less things in there, and I'm okay watching it grow in for a little bit. So usually for me, when I'm all done with my container, I'll take a handful of compost and just kind of use that as a mulch or top dress on top. I think it looks prettier. Again, adds a little nutrition and will help me with the watering a little bit in that summertime.
I like instant gratification.
There you go. You know, hydrate the soil. Sometimes, you know, most gardeners have potting soils probably sitting behind their house, and I'll raise my hand. How long has it been sitting back there? And when's the last time it saw a drop of rain? So if we have dried out soil, we need to hydrate it before you put it in a pot. If we put it in there, it's going to be very hydrophobic, and the water is just going to sit on there and take a long time for it to wet back down. So if you've got an old bag, doesn't mean it needs to be tossed. Let's get it in a container, add some water, let it sit for a few hours and re-moisten. Then we've got happy soil that we can use yet again.
Word?
Moisten, happy moisten.
Re-moisten?
Re-moisten, I just made it up. What else we got? Replace, you know, if you've got an old pot, I just mentioned an old bag of soil sitting behind the house is one thing. If I've got an old pot that's got soil in it for 5 or 6 years and you're wondering why your plants aren't growing, we need to replace that soil. We can't use it forever. So if you know, if you're like me, I'm swapping out my containers winter to spring. I'm putting in pansies and things in the winter. I don't replace the entire mass of potting soil here as I did mine the last couple weeks, but I will take the old pansies out, dig in there with my gloves, make sure I've got any root masses out of the way. Maybe I've still got 2/3 of my container filled with usable soil. Now I can top it off with fresh, add my fertilizer, put my new plants in, and then off we go for another season, okay? Now, if we talk a little bit, let's do this before, because I'll show you a couple of mine. So Holly, why don't you say, you just did a sunny one. What is Holly doing there? She's got all kinds of fun stuff.
Sunny one, and I love to work with foliage color as well as flower color. I've got a brocade geranium in here that the flower's just fine, but I love it for its foliage. It's dark burgundy with a chartreuse edge. I like to offset it with some calibrachoas in various colors. My thriller is a Dracaena and a dahlia. The dahlia will get a little bit taller. Some nemesia, and I also have an empomia in this. This is this bright chartreuse foliage plant that's going to cascade over, and it'll really be stunning against this black pot. We also have pots planted that are specifically for hummingbirds. This one will attract the hummingbirds.
Let's see how long I can hold this up.
So we've got some salvia in the middle with some kufia and calibrachoa. Hummingbirds just adore all of those. And keep in mind, when you're doing something in a ceramic decorative pot, any of these would be beautiful in another color too. So this would be gorgeous in the blue, this would be gorgeous in the blue, or any other color of your choosing. So you kind of play around with the colors of the pots, not just the foliage.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, I'll hold this one up too a little quick so you can see.
Show that
a freshly planted one.
Yeah, show the.
So again, you can see she had the sweet potato vine here in the middle, all kinds of different million bells, we call those, nemesia, different colors of those. I'm a dahlia addict, so these are actually in my pots at my house too. The little dark angel dahlias, the little annual short dahlias with the purple foliage, verbenas, you can see hanging out the front, another good spiller. And then that beautiful geranium, I just grabbed 2 of those for my deck pots too. That's a brocade geranium. So I've got that beautiful lime green with that dark center,
I
a
just
little
love that
little
geranium
corally
now.
orange flower. So that's a great sun. You know, again, she packs them. You know, that's a beautiful container I take home today. I got instant gratification.
Yep, that's what I like.
So I'll show you my simple ones here that I brought in. So this is kind of fun because I'll show you this too. Look at that. I just wheeled my pot across the table because this is a fun little device sometimes you can use. Plant caddy, caster wheels. These hold like 500 pounds. So if you've got heavy containers, it's a great way to set it on there. Won't even see it, but I've got an area I can move it around, tuck it up against the house in the winter, and not have to carry it. So if I look at mine, you know, I love orange, you know, and again, I'm the self-confessed kind of matchy. I like patterns and symmetry, so mine's probably a little simpler. But this is right up in a really hot spot in my yard, where I park my truck when I get home. I like my purple salvia with orange million bells in one, which I planted, and then I brought this one down to show you. He goes on the other corner of my little parking pad. So this is what we call a boiling glaze. I love these colors. If you can see that pot, look at all the colors in there. It's very rough. So we call that boiling glaze. They're almost like little art pieces, lots of different colors. They're super frost proof. I discovered them 3, 4, 5 years ago now. We get a lot of them here at the nursery for sale, but I love them in my yard because I think the colors pop. I have blacks and blues. I've got other glaze containers as well, but I love the boiling. So being me, a matchy, and I'm always stuck in a rut, this is almost exactly what I planted in this pot last year because I loved it. So if I look at that container in the middle there, see if I can do this without breaking my back. So I've got this container, you can see on the top, I've got the celosia. This will give me a big kind of fuchsia red feather plume flower. I love old school geranium, so we'll tricolor geranium, give me a little coral flower. And then I simply love million bells, so that's surrounding the edge. I went with the purple on the front with the orange on the side there, and then I put one more orange on the back because, again, I like my symmetry, my mirror. So when I drive up, I'll see that orange cascading out, purple on the back, and I'll have that nice foliage contrast. Still have plenty of flower, but I've also got some nice foliage, which is my taste. And I like to see some nice contrast in the foliage as well. So that's a good sun. The shade one's going to be heavy. Let me see if I can get him up here.
Your stem's about to fall off.
Yeah, that's the other thing with wheels. Don't put them on the table or they might roll off. So this is a brand new garden I did last year at my place that is really total shade, you know, till about 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the summer. I get a little bit of that late evening sun when it's a little lower in the sky. But I needed something that really didn't get much light. It's a brand new area. I was stumped. I think I came in here in June and said, I got a big black pot. I want to do a new container, and I just could not decide what I wanted to put in it. So Holly and the ladies actually picked some stuff out for me, and I went home and planted it, and I thought, I don't know. And it grew in for 2 weeks, and it might be the favorite pot I have in my yard. So I'm doing almost exactly the same thing as last year. But what I found, you know, if we look at this container, let me see if I can tip it over so you can see the colors in there, all good for shade. If I look at the middle plant here, this is what we call coleus. So that's my thriller. If I grow this coleus, and I'll be feeding this every couple of weeks, this coleus will probably reach about 2.5, 3 feet here in the middle of the summer. So there's my big foliage specimen. I've got canary wings begonias for some lime, a little bit of flower that will fill those edges, as well as the side I look at, my favorite color, orange. I've got that beautiful begonia that I will have to deadhead a little bit. That's not one that doesn't self. I'll go out there and pick some of those big double flowers off when they're spent. And then I went with, again, the Torrenia as a spiller around all 4 sides. So I've got 4 of those in there. If I turn that thing, it's going to look great from all sides because this is a spot in my yard that I will see it from all 4 sides. Maybe other times I'm up against a wall, my thriller might be towards the back, fillers and spillers just off the front, if that makes sense. This is one I wanted to see from all sides. So
that begonia it's not just gorgeous flower color, it's gorgeous foliage too.
So maybe
it's got a striped foliage.
Maybe if I can show you, if you can see the leaves on that, that's got all kinds
Try
of
to
great,
show it from behind. Show
great
the behind.
contrast. And you can probably see the colors
Yeah,
if you
there
look
you
up through it right there. That's got
They're
great
just
foliage.
gorgeous.
And an orange flower. How could I lose? So I'll claim this is different than last year because I'm always stuck in a rut because I didn't have the begonias. I had some little Lyria grasses, which were very nice in there. And I had all purple Torini. And this year I went with 2 purple and this, I thought this silver one was just beautiful with the little lighter color flower. So now we've got 2 of each. So it is different, honey. You don't have to say I do the same thing every year. But that's a good one for shade again. You know, this is one, if I'll pick this up, let me see if I can, oh, that's a big pot. You know, it's a really good sized black pot. Now, again, I'm only doing annuals in this. So if I wanted, this is an example of maybe one where I could put an Upsy Daisy spacer in there because I'm just doing this to last me till probably mid-October, end of October. Once we get a frost, things start to decline. I typically take all this out at my house. This is a pot that I put, I think, 50 daffodils in last winter, fall. And that way this spring, I had daffodils blooming for 2-3 months. Those just came out, brought it down here, and now we're back down to annual time, okay? We're trying not to roll this other one off my table. So there's a lot of fun plants. You know, this is always a fun class to do. We thought about maybe having a container war side by side here, stealing plants, and I think everybody does that now. I'm going to take that for mine, and you get that for yours. But I think, again, it's such a personal thing for you as a gardener. Just because I like something or Holly does, you might have looked at mine and said, ew, I can't stand yellow. I love yellow foliage. You know, others don't. You know, it's your pot. Do what your taste is, but just kind of keep a lot of these principles in mind as you're down here shopping and looking for frankly, your own specimens that you will get to enjoy for the whole year. Okay. So here's a couple. I'm going to read. Actually, that's just so funny. I just pulled out his email and I can see him outside the door here. So he's not even watching class today. But we have a really good regular customer, Mr. Fred Rowe out in Snohomish, and he sent in a great question. You know, what kinds of perennials would you put in containers? And how would you figure out the size of the pot? You know, and that's a great question. Really, I think probably a lot of people, this doesn't have to be annuals. You know, I talked about Japanese maples and conifers. You know, you get whatever you like for your thriller. We can always add some filler and some spiller in there. But what do you want to have in your container? There's some great perennials for growing in pots. It's just one of those things like an annual. Unlike an annual, I would have that for a few years, but I don't want anyone to think that's forever, because if I plant, you know, Holly did that beautiful shade container. You know, I don't think she'll have to do anything with that for probably 2 or 3 seasons. But
except for replace the tree.
Exactly, except for replace the annual. But she's going to have to, at some point in the winter, say, okay, this pot's a little tired. I'm going to pull out the grass, divide it, put a piece back in, move it into my garden, get a new little smaller specimen to start with. The heuchera might get divided down the road. These are all plants we don't have to just send to the compost heap in the sky. We can reutilize them in our garden, divide them, add more containers. I mean, there's always a way to recycle and reuse them in the landscape or in another container.
And depending on what the plant is, if you really love that container, you can root prune every 2 or 3 years to keep it in that container.
Keep it in there. So if we look at, you know, one question I'll probably anticipate we're going to get is, you know, I've got this in a pot for a few years. How do I know that I need to replant it? You know, to me, it's always going to be, think back to that summer before. You were out there watering it. Was it going right through? Was the plant declining a little bit? Maybe not blooming as much, even though you're feeding it. You know, everything will get root bound at some point. For me, you know, I'll take a container like this blue one, and I'll take my finger and I'll stick it in the edge of the pot down in late winter. My maples, grasses, anything in a container. Can I get my finger down the edge of the pot, or is it solid root system? Do I have an issue? Then, okay, let's tip it over real quick, cut things out with a hoary knife, a little trowel, get things set aside, do some root pruning like Holly mentioned, put it back in, or go plant it in my garden somewhere and come down to the nursery and grab something new to try in the container. So we can always check to see how root bound things are. I like the transplanting and inviting in the winter time, or when we're dormant. It's going to be a little safer than doing it, you know, in June or late May like we are right now. Okay. So perennials, you know, is a great example of that. Like like Fred asked, should we have, you know, certain perennials? I mean, again, I could go out there and pick out 50 different things in our sun or our shade perennials that are awesome in containers. You know, I think Holly has the same thing in one of hers. We love hardy fuchsias in a shade container. I've got a golden foliage one, beautiful in my shade garden. It's on its own. When it was young, planted some little orange impatiens around it so the container looked more full. Now that the fuchsia is enormous after 3-4 years, it's on its own. It's a great little single specimen. I could go out in the sun out there, pick out lavenders, you know, different herbs that would come back. I mean, there's a zillion things that we can grow, anything in a container, if we've got the right soil mix like we talked about, and we keep an eye on the fertilizing and making sure we have good drainage. With potting soil, we've always got good drainage as long as we make sure those drain holes are unclogged and we've got it raised up off the hard surface a little bit too. Okay.
And that's another thing. If things start to get root bound, that drainage might start getting clogged.
Yeah. Now, if we talk size of the pot real quick, you know, again, you can see a huge variety in here, different colors, different styles. We've got plastic, we've got ceramic, we've got my boiling glaze. You know, I don't have a magic answer for you to say how big of a pot you need. My question would always be, what are you planning on growing in it? Is it going to be something permanent, like a maple for, say, 7, 8, 9, 10 years? And yes, I need to get, you know, something 24 to 30 inches wide, you know, 24, 30 inches deep. And I'm going to have a happy tree for probably a decade in there. If I go buy a little 12-inch pot and I throw a maple in it, I might have 1 or 2 years before I got to take it out of there, root prune it, plant it in the yard. I'm not going to get as long a life. With flowers, you know, we could really plant them in any size pot we want as long as we don't overcrowd it. So you saw this one here has got a beautiful array of plants in it. You know, that's what, 18 inches tall, maybe 14 inches across. And she ended up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We got about 9, 10 little 4-inch plants in there, and it looks full. It looks great. That's going to look awesome all season long.
Again, instant gratification.
But we're not worried about that coming back next year because that's all annuals. If you look at this one, it's honestly about the same diameter across. It's not quite as deep, but I know she would want to have the hydrangea, the heuchera, the grass, and even Lysimachia will come back or stay evergreen. I don't want to change that next year. I'm going to be good for probably 2 or 3 years before the hydrangea fills up with roots, and then I can pull it out, root prune it, or go plant it in my yard somewhere in a nice shady spot and make a new container off to the races again. Okay. So now if we talk, see what time check. Oh, we're doing good today. So just real quick before we do questions, you know, we always have great sales for our classes. So this week it's seed grow. We really want to get people to fertilize. You know, the basics to me of all gardening, hopefully you can't see that. The basics to me of all gardening is always about the soil. We talked about really good organic potting mixes from E.B. Stone that we carry. And then I want to get on seed grow for a regular fertilizing schedule. So right now, you can come down and get the 1.5 pound cans of seed grows on special $9.99. And if you're like us and you got a few containers and hanging baskets and everything else, then we're going to get a 5-pound bag. And that's on a great special at $19.99. So that's a great price, $5 off. That'll get you really good food. You got to buy a bag of that, probably last you for the season, keeping up on the maintenance of all your containers and baskets around. Okay. Today, if you didn't know and you're local here, you know, we always do this kind of container gardening weekend. So today is free potting soil day. If you bring your container down with you, you come buy some annuals, whatever you want to put in it. We've got staff out back set up to plant your plant for you, no charge, and include all the potting soil you need at no charge as well.
And you can still purchase it. It doesn't have to be one you already have.
Yep, and you can always come down, you know, again, if you're like, I'd like to add another pot, come down and take advantage of the half price on all the outdoor pottery. We've got some wood here. We've got fibercrete is on half price. We've got some plastic even if you want something a little simpler. But we've got lots of containers here too. You can buy the pot, you get your plants, you get free soil and free labor to get it all set up for you to take home and start growing. Okay. Tomorrow, today it's 10 to 4 is free planting day. Tomorrow it's 11 to 4. We'll do it on Sunday as well because tomorrow at 11, we'll be in here doing hanging basket class. So we'll have a similar discussion on plant choices. It will mostly be spillers for the hanging basket, but we'll talk about some different options for hanging baskets, different sizes, different ways to do it, and give you a little bit of help on that as well. And then again, bring your baskets down or your containers tomorrow as well from 11 to 4, same exact free soil and free planting service going. Now, next weekend, we're getting back to the outdoor plants again. So I'll be in here on Saturday doing hydrangea class, which is always a really popular one. We'll go through all kinds of cool hydrangeas for shade, part shade, and sun. Most people don't realize we've got a lot of good options for paniculata hydrangeas we can grow out in full sun. And Sunday is one of my favorites, the rose class. So we'll have roses in here. We got roses are just about opening in bloom here in Washington. We'll have a bunch of full bloom roses. We'll have a good rose seminar on Sunday as well, kind of talking more about summer maintenance and spraying and everything we need to know about how to grow roses successfully. Okay. So I think that's my 2-page outline is just about done. You got anything else to add, Holly?
I think we covered it.
Yeah, she's got some fun plants here. We'll put these out for sale today. You come down and buy a holly container.
And if you're not sure what to do, come on in. We'll help you.
There you go. So let's turn this up. We'll turn Nicole back on here and let's see. We probably got some good questions.
Yeah. Can you guys tell us some of these pots that you planted up, what size those are roughly, just so people have an idea how many plants you put in, kind of what size pot you were using?
Next year, I'll remember to bring a tape measure in here and we can measure them. But the red one here that Holly did, I would say you're about 16 inches tall, maybe 14 inches across. Because that's a good glazed one. The plastic one there is very nice. It's not, doesn't look like cheap plastic to me.
No,
it's a little bit taller, about the same width, 14 inches across, but I'd say about 18 tall, a little bit taller. The same exact one when we brought the hummingbird up, that's in the same pot. You know, mine, the boiling glaze, let me lift it up here again. You know, that's kind of more of a little low bowl. So I'm only probably 12 inches tall, but about, again, 14 inches across at the top. And then my big black shade one here, I drag it back in. You know, this one that I'm going to pack for the shade, I'll lift it up one more time. You know, that's a pretty good size one. So I'm probably 20 inches tall and about 18 inches across at the top. You know, this is originally the black one, just for me. That was what I had a maple tree in for a long time. So I had that as a maple tree. Kind of redid the yard a little bit. I mentioned making a new shade garden, and I decided the maple's going in the yard. I want to do kind of a nice little color pot where I put in a new walkway, and I just want a little color right there. So that's why it's so big.
And then there's this really big one behind.
Yeah, and we've got the really big one, as you can see. This is plastic again right here, but a nicer looking plastic. That's about 2 feet by 2 feet. And that's got the petunias in it. So what do you think those petunias will grow at about 3 feet this season?
Those petunias will cover this whole pot.
We'll have ground cover petunia here by August. It'll be trailing out.
Yeah,
there you go. So that's a fun one with all the spillers in there too.
Excellent. Thank you. So we talked about pot risers in order to get proper drainage. So somebody asked, do you still need to use those if it's sitting on gravel?
It's not gravel. Absolutely not. In fact, the boiling glaze at my house, that's where mine is. So it doesn't have pot feet, but on my patio, my porch landing, other areas in my yard that are hard surface, I always have pot feed or the risers, one or the other. In the garden, I think Holly's the same way, but I use a lot of big pots in the garden, not in the porch or the driveway or the other areas. I use them up in my garden. What I will do is get flat rocks, and I will set those down the same kind of thing and have my planter on the stones. That way it doesn't settle. I've always got an open area in the middle where water can get out of there, and I don't get my tree to end up rooting into my soil that's underneath the container, because that will happen at some point.
And again, on concrete and your patio, they help prevent that ring that you get from your pot too.
Yeah.
Excellent. You talked about changing over the soil. There were some questions about like, how diligent do you need to be? You know, those fine white root strings. Do you need to get rid of every single last one? You know, mixing up your old soil and your new soil, you know, just kind of good tips.
Get rid of most of them. I mean, honestly, I should pull the plants out of here and show you, because this, again, my big, huge black one, I think I had 50 daffodils planted in there, staged over 3 bloom times this spring, and this pot looked great for 3 months in my yard, knowing that I would take it out and plant summer annuals in it. Yes, I pulled the bulbs up, went planted them in the yard. I sent some down as a donation to our local arboretum. So I took it out. I took the root masses out. I got my trowel, broke that all up, reached in there with my hands and grabbed the clumps of roots that I could find. But there's absolutely still some little fine white roots in there that were there from the bulbs. It's not going to hurt my new plantings, but I'm making sure I don't have a big root mass. Let's say that was a maple tree or her hydrangea, 3 years from now, you are going to have nothing but root. When I take that out of there, that whole thing is going to come out, and I'm going to put in brand new soil and start over again.
And just keep in mind when you're using your older previous year soil, it's lacking nutrients. So that's what you need the fertilizer added to the new plantings.
Yeah, if I can guess, like most of my neighbors, I've done it before. You have a pot, you had flowers in it, you tuck it behind the house for the winter. Sometimes it's underneath an eave, it gets no rain, it dries out. We pull the plants out of there. That soil is going to be awful tired, if we've grown stuff in there for a while. Replace the soil. Again, I said that at the beginning. It doesn't matter if it's this class, the hydrangea class coming up, any class, it's always about good soil. If I've got great soil, I'm going to have great plants.
So we talked about, perennials, or when things start to get larger from the containers, dividing them. What's the best way to go about dividing your plants in terms of, actually logistically doing it?
Yep. Well, when I pull out a root mass of a perennial, I just did my mother-in-law's for her for Mother's Day a couple weeks ago.
Oh, such a good son.
But she had a bunch of Rudbeckia in there, and if we know Rudbeckia or Black-eyed Susan, it is nothing but roots. So it was a solid mass. There wasn't much soil left. So I upheaved the entire thing out of there, took my hoary knife and chopped it into chunks. I was able to put her back in 3 pieces of that Rudbeckia, which is plenty to fill it back up again with the other things I added. I think I had 20 more divisions that I took home, potted, and took to the Arboretum as a donation. I mean, there you can always get, when you plant a perennial in there, it's always going to develop and form a nice root mass. We can divide that in multiple pieces. The heuchera, mentioned the same way. In a few years that could come out. She's probably going to have a dozen plants out of that if we wanted to divide it up a little bit. We're going to always try as best we can to get that stuff done at the tail end of winter. That's what I mentioned. I go out, I check my fingers in, I check to see if I'm root bound. If I am, that's a great time while they're still dormant to take that stuff out of there, chop it up, divide it, and replant it, and then I'm good to go for springtime.
Excellent. So we kind of have a specific question, but it's good because it, applies to all of us. So they have candy tuft in their container and it's starting to fade for the season. So can you plant something else like super close to it on top of it to kind of keep your containers looking fresh without impacting the candy tuft next season? Or how do you do that?
I'd have to almost see if she's having to dig out a big chunk of the roots of the candy tuft to get something pinched in there. Probably not going to work for the candy tuft, to be honest with you. But
possibly an annual.
Yeah, I mean, if you wanted to put an annual in there, yeah, it'll find some root space. But if I've got to cleave a good portion of the root system off a perennial to tuck another annual in or a different plant, I think you're going to suffer a little bit on the existing one.
Okay, gotcha. Somebody asked, we talked about, kind of more mainstay plants and pots. What advantages do you have to planting a tree like a Japanese maple or something in a pot versus putting them in the ground? Why wouldn't you just put it in the ground?
Well, if you have Acer palmatomyces like I do, and you can't say no to maples.
Me too.
I got plenty of pots around. I can grow it for a while in a pot before I have to go find somewhere to put it in the yard. But no, seriously, it could be either way. I just, again, it's your taste. If I have no problem with you buying the maple, put it right in your landscape, great, it's done. But there's a lot of really cool dwarf ones. And for me, I love the red foliage. I love the branching. I think they look cool in the winter. I don't mind using that as a really cool thriller in my container that I can still do whatever I want around it for a number of years. And then, yeah, 7-8 years go by, I can go pop it out in my yard somewhere or get a bigger pot to keep it happy, one of the two.
And Japanese maples, they are a great pot plant because they can be root bound a little longer than others. They can be drought a little longer than others. They make a really good container.
I mean, I got a hot spot in front of my house. I could plant any kind of hot annuals. I got plenty of other pots out there. I got plenty of color, but I wanted a nice thick red Japanese maple specimen So I selected a dwarf one. Mine's called Candy Kitchen. It's in a massive, 30-inch by 2-foot deep black glazed pot right in the south side of my house. Gets cooked all day. I hardly have to water it, and that's what I wanted, that red foliage color up against the color of my house, and then flowers and everything else around it kind of thing.
If you have a tree that needs to come out, but your pot kind of tapers up at the top, I don't know that you necessarily have any in there. What's the best way to get it out? Because you don't want to, totally shave down the root system to get it out the top. Do you have any tips?
Well, I'll give you two. Holly mentioned one. A hori knife's a pretty useful device because I got a sharp edge and I can kind of stab it in there and kind of cut and cleave some roots a little bit. If you really are careful, and I hate to recommend power tools in a gardening class, but Sawzall works really well, and I've done that a couple times in my house. You got a little battery or plug-in Sawzall. If you can get in and kind of run that around the edge of the container, being careful again not to cut you or the container, that will help you loosen it up as well. I'm like any of you, trial and error is the ultimate saying in gardening, and I wish I could go back 20 years and buy 2 different pots on my patio. I've got 3-foot tall black jars that I love, and yes, they look beautiful and they flute right back in the middle. I'm stuck, every decade. I've got 2 beautiful using them right now. They've been there for 10 years. I'm in the mood to change them out. I don't know how I'm going to get them out of there, even with the Sawzall. I'm either going to have to smash the pot, which is not going to happen, or I sacrifice a tree and put something different in next time. So when you're picking out a pot, I talked to 4 or 5 people yesterday about this alone. Get something that is not fluted back up. They're very cool looking. Yes, there's certainly some things to do them in. I would stick with annuals and something like that because I'm not worried about getting it out later. But I'm always looking for something like that. Nice belly pot, straight sides. You can see both the ones I showed are like that, that I don't have to struggle with getting something out down the road.
All right, good tips, and good to know that you guys struggle with the same things as a lot of people at home too. So
we lose you?
Are you there? Can you hear me?
You are there. We lost you for a sec.
Sorry, just keeping you on your toes. It's good to know that you guys have the same problems that a lot of us at home too. That we're not the only ones struggling. So, I
thought it would be fun. I should have asked Holly to count. I counted at my house yesterday. I have 23 frost-proof containers around my landscape, and I can almost guarantee you she's 80. Got me beat by 3 times. Yeah.
So
no more pots.
Right? So we keep talking about frost-proof containers, and we just need to, for those of you at home, it's a matter of how the container is made, that those ceramic containers that they have behind them are meant to last outside all winter. It's just the way they're manufactured. Nothing you can do one way or the other. It's just the way they're made. So make sure that you're looking for that when you look for outdoor containers. But there was a question about how do you protect your containers because they are more exposed and more vulnerable in the winter months. Do you have any tips on how to kind of keep them, the plants inside healthy through over the winter?
Again, for me with an old house in Everett, I've got huge eaves. I got to be really careful where I tuck containers because you don't have rain, you're going to desiccate, dry out, and you're going to kill anything in the winter if it doesn't get rain. So I would rather leave it out where it gets the rain, gets the weather. If you have a tender specimen planted in there, perhaps it goes to the garage. Perhaps you watch the weather. We didn't get much winter this year in our neck of the woods until late. It came in February where we did have 4 or 5 days that got down into the low 20s, high teens. Yeah, if I had a specimen in mind that was a little more tender, I would have shoved that container up against the house, put it in the garage, for a few days to protect it, and then brought it right back outside kind of thing.
And with some of plants, that rain, that water in the soil just before it freezes, that helps insulate that plant.
Yep.
If it's a plant that's going to be a little more sensitive, wrap the pot in burlap or an old blanket. It's like when we are chilly, we put a jacket on and then we're fine. So, that will help too.
That's a great tip. Yeah.
Yeah, that is a great tip. So roses, somebody asked Mr. Fred Rowe, because he was watching. So
I swear I saw him outside the door here about 10 minutes ago.
Yeah, no, he's joining us now. He asked, can you plant containers? Can you plant roses in containers?
Yeah, roses, You could grow any rose in a pot, but again, it's going to be depending on the size and how long. We're not going to be able to grow a rose in a pot probably forever, but for quite a number of years, absolutely. There are some better, you know, just, you know, as an example, there's a great new knockout called Petite Knockout. You know, that's a pot of, if I had one of my pots and planted a Petite Knockout in there, I probably could have it in there literally forever. I'm not worried about it. If I'm going to get a Mr. Lincoln, a Double Delight, you know, a regular hybrid tea or Grandiflora, you know, and say the pots that I brought in, I'm probably good for a number of years. I mean, 7, 8, 9, maybe 10 years again. But at some point, I'm going to do that finger test on the edge. I'm going to be watering it. There's no soil left. It's all root. And it's going to start struggling. Then we know we have to take it out, root prune it, replant it, or put it out in the yard.
Gotcha. Switching gears. Somebody asked about.
Actually, let me add one more thing on the rose, because we'll talk about this next week on the rose. But it always reminds me of the wintertime grafts. So if you're talking about a rose bush, I would get own root rose. I don't have any issue with cold, especially in a container. If I buy a grafted rose, or in particular a rose tree, I would give you very little chance of the tree ever coming through unless I protect it, tuck it in the garage, wrap the graft. That's the weak point of the rose. It's not the rose itself. I hope that makes sense, and we'll talk about that next weekend.
I mean, I guess we'll let you add more information to our brains. I mean, you know, we'll take that. This is shifting gears. Holly, this one's kind of geared a little bit more towards you. What are your thoughts about adding houseplants into your summer outdoor containers?
Houseplants are awesome. You just need to wait until the temperatures are about 50, 55 degrees at night. And they're perfect for an outdoor. Treat them as an annual. Bring them inside again in the fall for a houseplant and repeat. They're great.
So while I'm sure that was all really great, it was hard to hear you. Trevor, can you say something first so it clicks into her? It wasn't recognizing your voice.
No, she said exactly what there's some fabulous houseplants, especially when we get to foliage, and some bloom too. But you could absolutely use houseplants in a container outdoors. In our neck of the woods, we have to wait for, like Holly said, the temperature to get up there in the 50-degree at night range. If we take a houseplant outside, chuck it in our pot in April, probably not going to turn out so swell. That houseplant's going to struggle for a time. If we would do it now in May, over the summer, absolutely. We just want to make sure we get it back out from the outdoors or the indoors before we start getting cool at night. You know, maybe it's mid-September.
Yeah, it all depends. Just keep an eye out on the nighttime temperatures.
Watch the weather. Yeah. There you go.
Perfect. Thank you for translating, Trevor.
I mean, a great example of that is citrus. I mean, I can't tell you how many people around here are trying to grow citrus. You can't grow it outside year round. Almost. We're getting close with global warming, but you can't have it outside year round. That's a really common plant. Folks bring it out first part of May, enjoy it on the patio, put it back in the house, you know, end of September, leave it as a house plant, do the same thing next year.
Cool. Can you show us those fertilizers you mentioned in the beginning again? Just show us
so
the
again,
packaging.
I'm an organic guy, so, and I know Holly swears by this too. Or Ultra Bloom is the best thing you could ever do for budding and flowering. And that's not just what we're talking about today. I use this on my rhododendrons in early summer. I mean, you could put this on a lot of plants. I just want more bud, more bloom. That's all phosphorus. Rose and flower has got a little bit more balance on it. So these are the two things I put in every one of my containers as a base to start. I certainly could go back and reapply these on the surface and water it in every 6 weeks if you wanted to. At that point, typically for me, Mr. Smith, our owner here, has convinced me on Seagrow finally.
He hasn't convinced
Just don't
me
tell
yet.
him. So I got Seagrow, and I use this, like I mentioned, on my dahlias, on my annual containers, a lot of stuff I'm trying to give a quick little kick to. Flower and bloom, again, is all about flower. I tend to get the all-purpose for me because I want foliage and bloom. I get plenty of bloom on my annuals. I just want to make sure I've got a lot of good foliage too. So either one of those is great, but you could kind of pick whichever you like.
All right, perfect. Thank you.
Those are the ones on special.
There it is. Somebody asked about putting fabric pots on a cement patio, or, you know, fabric pots in general. Do you need to be careful where you put them? Do you advise against?
You'll get a big old stain from the soil and the food if you put it on directly on a surface. I would raise that up, and that's maybe a great example for my dolly, you know, or something I can set up as a little platform, a trivet. You can find plastic little trivets, something to set it up so it's not just sitting on the ground. I do fabric pots in my vegetable area. Potatoes are in mine. I do tomatoes in those as well, but that would be on soil, so I'm not worried about it. If I had that on my patio, my wife would kill me if I had 6 big dark circles at the end of the summer.
And keep in mind with fabric pots, they require a little more watering because the air gets through them more than if it was a ceramic or a plastic pot.
So that's a great question. There was one kind of to go along with that. If you have something that has like really good drainage, somebody asked specifically with hanging baskets where the water just seems to run through it. Is there anything you can do to help kind of retain the moisture in there once it's already done and planted and established?
Sometimes for us, you know, we do a lot of basket planting. We plant stuff for our city here that gets hung all over town. Sometimes we will put another pot, but like an inch or two deep saucer or tray at the base of the hanging basket to start with, then fill all the soil up, plant everything. Now I've got just a little bit of insurance down there at the base as a reservoir. So maybe I miss a day or I'm gone for the weekend and I water before I leave. My chances are better that I will be alive when I get back on Sunday night, kind of thing, when we get into the heat of the summer.
And we do have cocoa coir on wire hanging baskets too, that sometimes they have a plastic liner in them. Poke holes in that liner and that will help too.
Yeah.
All right. Do you have any suggestions on how to protect potted plants from small animals like rabbits and, you know, who knows?
That's a tough one because rabbits are inundating the earth these days, it seems like. But if you've got animal issues, you know, think of it to me, it's 2 different discussions. If I have something edible, herb, tomato, something I'm going to put into my mouth at some point, we got to be careful which repellent we use. We've got a vegetable, edible, safe one in there called Repelzol that would have more on the cayenne pepper, some things that might train the dog, the cat, the rabbit, whatever it is, from not getting in there and doing some nibbling. I would start with that as a spray around the base. It doesn't hurt the foliage, won't hurt the plants in there. And there's other granular options. What's that? What are you going to do? Yeah. I want to hear what Holly has to say on this one.
I do all my veggie and herb gardening in my driveway. I have a back 40. I let the bunnies live there. But I was raised organic gardening. You use what resources you have. My husband every spring asks where he needs to pee, and he pees around the perimeter. They don't bother anything when there's that.
I was waiting for that.
And it works best for grown male urine, not female.
But don't email me this week and tell me that you had your husband go out and pee behind the house for the next 4 days.
I have had so many people come in and go, "Oh my God, that works."
Yeah, it does.
But remember, we're predators. So that they sense that. Now, if it's pouring down rain, you got to have them go out and pee again.
Oh my goodness. This class is degrading quickly.
Never a dull moment. Thanks, Holly. On our toes.
So yes, do what Holly said. I can't say it again. Or try a couple of the Repelzol products for bonides. The way you could buy a spray if you don't want to do it that way.
Gotcha. So we were talking about dividing plants. Somebody specifically asked about hellebores. You know, is now their dormant time? Can you divide them? What's the best time of year to do those?
I mean, again, there's always a reason that something has to get done, a project, whatever, you got to get it moved or you're going to lose the plant, then that's a different story. But man, if you can wait until we're dormant is the only time I would ever spade up perennials and divide them. So Thanksgiving, December, try to get those before they bloom, essentially. What's that?
Again, it's keeping track of the temperatures.
Yeah. Once we get a good frost in the fall, get a little cooler, I have at it. You're not going to damage the hellebore by dividing it at that point. But man, I really would hesitate having you dig it up here during the growing season.
Gotcha. Good advice. Thank you. Somebody was talking about, established plants that are in containers or in like a wine barrel. What's the best way to add more soil or compost around it? Do you need to actually take that shrub out to add more underneath it? Do you just put it around it? How do you kind of navigate that?
Guessing as it's settled down, so it's just too far down. Yeah, we would probably want to, I don't know how many years it's been in, it would be the same answer. If it's been in there for 5 years and it's rooted out, you're going to have a tough time ripping it all out during the growing season. But certainly this next winter, that'd be an easy fix. By spading those out, we could rebuild the soil at the base, pop them back in, and we got a fresh container going forward.
Okay. What are your thoughts about terracotta pots?
Oh, was that too quick?
Terracotta is tough. In our neck of the woods, and you can get sealer, you can try. My mother might be watching this and she'll be mad because she knows I don't like terracotta either, but you can get away with it. But man, if you don't seal terracotta up here, they're going to crack and disintegrate at some point. It's just inevitable. So if you want, again, frost proof is a whole nother level. I would never have to replace, that my whole lifetime, as long as I don't drop it and crack it. Terracotta would be a little more worried about.
Okay, good to know. When we were talking about the soil, the water retention and keeping things in there, somebody asked about your thoughts on using cut sponges at the base of the pot to help with soil retention. Is that a good idea, bad? What do you think?
I'd get worried about pathogens sitting there in that wet sponge down the road at some point.
Same reason I wouldn't recommend gravel or anything like that. It could retain bacteria.
Yeah. I remember when I started doing this back in the early 90s, everybody, you got to put 4 inches of pea gravel at the bottom of the pot. You can't do anything but that. I think man has figured out over the years, you actually create more surface tension and worse issues if you add gravel. You want nothing but soil. Sometimes I'll take a little piece of mesh and put a screen over at the bottom underneath the hole on most of mine, but I'm never going to add gravel or anything else on the base.
What about wine corks?
Same thing. You're just asking for something to stay moist down there in almost an anaerobic environment, and you're going to end up with probably a bacteria of some kind growing in there.
Okay. I think we've covered pretty much everything. There's there's always going to be questions. It always happens that we say, okay, we're going to wrap up, and then you guys throw, a bunch more in the Q&A. We're always here. We're happy to chat about these things. Both Holly and Trevor will be around today. So, shoot us an email or give us a phone call. They're happy to talk about it. Our email address is sunnyside@msn.com. So thanks for joining us today, and we hope to see you back tomorrow for our hanging basket class.
Keep on gardening, everybody. Stay safe out there today.
Bye-bye.